Microsoft has pretty sneakily added an anti-cheat into Windows 10. The Fall Creators Update comes with a thing called TruePlay back in the gaming options and is basically a anti-cheat that is OS level detection. And so basically developers are able to implement it with very, very simple code, and they're able to add in basically sections of the game that they want it to be checking for different sort of hacking tools and simple little processing kind of tools and things like that. And so it's actually fairly interesting because since it is OS level, it's going to be able to detect things that most anti-cheats would have a hard time accessing. So it's going to be fairly interesting, but there is sort of a catch to it, as in, you know, a catch for developers to be able to use it, and it is sort of a catch as in users and things like that, and some people are worried about privacy and stuff like that. Obviously, I'm not too concerned about it, but let's go ahead and talk about it. Michael here with another topic video. So what is TruePlay? It is an anti-cheat that is basically implemented into Windows 10, and I think that's fairly cool. It's similar to Steam's VAC so far. You actually can look at the implementation and the code available to everyone right off the bat. So if you go into any of the Creator Hub stuff from Microsoft, you can actually go and look directly at the code. So you know exactly what the developer is putting in. And it's a very, very simple, like 6-line codes, or 6-line codes. Wow, I know how to talk. 6 lines of code basically on their sort of initialization process to say, hey, we want to use this feature. And then basically a few other lines of code to basically say, hey, we want to be checking if they're doing anything, make it so the game is inaccessible. It's very, very simple in that sort of sense. And so it's not something that's going to be like super advanced or anything like that, but it is something that is actually fairly interesting because having anti-cheat into a lot of multiplayer games is going to be incredibly important, especially when you get into a lot of the more advanced multiplayer games that are coming to the Windows Store. Now, the catch for developers is that it only works with Windows Universal apps. This means basically I think it's a tool for Microsoft more so than anybody else. I think it's mostly a tool that they're looking at being like, oh, hey, we want to implement it into games like Forza or something like that. And so basically it's not something that a lot of people are going to be using, especially since if you have a multi-platform game, let's say you want to have it on like Windows, and then you also want to have it on, let's say, I don't know, Steam, because, you know, Steam's a huge thing. Steam does have VAC and stuff like that, so it's like, you know, one of those things that, hey, they can implement VAC. But, you know, let's say they want to have it on other distribution platforms, you're not going to be able to use TruePlay inside of that. You're only going to have it, or only going to be able to have it on your Windows Universal apps. And so it's one of those situations to where it's not going to be widely adapted, I don't feel like. It's going to be one of those cases to where there's going to be a small subset of games, maybe AAA games that go into the Windows Store are going to end up implementing it. Maybe it's going to be one of those situations to where things that would normally have things like VAC, when they're going to the Windows Store, it seems like it's kind of a solution to that. It's like, oh, instead of using VAC, just implement this. And it's very, very simple. So they can just detect, hey, which version of the game is this? Or maybe they have multiple builds to where it's like one build has it, so it's using VAC, and the other build has it, so it's using Windows Store. And it's basically like, here, use TruePlay. And this is one of those situations where I think it's actually pretty dang cool, because the more sort of anti-cheats we have in a lot of multiplayer games, the better. And making it so it's very easy to implement is definitely going to be a positive thing. That said, however, people are having concerns with single-player games being locked out because of anti-cheat. And not mostly because of like, oh, people just don't want us to cheat in their single-player games. It's mostly because of things like loot boxes, microtransactions, and DLC. A lot of hacks and cheats and things like that are... I don't need that because I've already gotten it, so I'm just going to go ahead and ignore that. So hate me if you want to, but I'm just going to go ahead and wander and continue because that's what I'm doing. Anyways, it's going to be one of those situations where people are going to be looking at it in that sort of sense, and technically developers can do that. If they decide to do that, you know, that's going to be on the developer's side of things, and they're going to be like, hey, it's fairly easy to implement. And so basically you can implement it however you want, and that means that some developers are just going to be jerks about it. And they're going to be like, oh, no, you can't play a single-player game and cheat, But quite honestly, if they're thinking that sort of sense, then it's probably not worth playing their game, to be honest. So yeah, because they're anti-fun. But yeah, when it comes into multiplayer games, it's going to be great. And so the Windows Store, you know, when Universal apps are going through, they already are sort of harder to hack than most things. Most things inside of the Windows Store are fairly difficult to kind of crack into because Universal apps already have a sort of system level protection, but now they actually have an official anti-cheat that's going to be like, hey, you know, you can add this into your game if you want to. And developers are able to add it into any section of the game they want to. Let's say they do have microtransactions and things like that. They could only implement it in maybe the store or something like that, or maybe when they're doing a specific task inside of the game. And so you don't always have to have it on, and single player games are not going to have it everywhere if they're going to implement it at all. And so it's going to be one of those situations where, yeah, it's just kind of 100% optional. And to add on top of that, it's also 100% optional. It is an opt-in feature. So basically, if you are one of those people that doesn't want to have it and you're worried about privacy and it checking in on you, which Windows 10 is already checking in on you. So if you're worried about that, don't use Windows. In fact, use Linux and use, a homebrew version of Linux. It's your own sort of safety, security, whatever thing. I'm not 100% into security, but regardless, use Linux and everything and use a security branch for everything about that. Oh, hey, I found it. Sweet. That's what I was looking for. But if I end up alt-tabbing real quick and I go into the settings here, you can actually see, hey, look, gaming tab. They also added in some other features and things like that. They also added in Xbox networking, so you can see your Xbox server connectivity and everything like that. So not a huge feature, but some people are liking it. I don't know. I just kind of skipped over it. But here is TruePlay. Gaming is more fun when everyone plays fairly. We'll share system information or info with games using TruePlay to make sure everything runs the way it's meant to. So basically, it checks, hey, are they cheating? Yes, no, and then basically kicks you out of the game if you are. It isn't implemented into any games that I've seen so far. It probably will be in the future, but this is the interesting thing. It defaults to off. This could change in the future, but you can always just turn it off. It's here in the options. That means they want you to be able to turn it off. Now, it may limit the games you can play. So that means basically a game, when you start it up, I assume the first TruePlay game that you start up, it'll be like, hey, do you want to end up enabling anti-cheat? Because basically it's going to be like, hey, this uses TruePlay. Do you want it enabled? If you disable it, they might disable features inside of the game because, once again, it's not hard to implement for developers. And so it could be one of those situations where it's like, hey, yep, whatever, I don't want to use it because I want to go ahead and use my cheats and hacksaws and stuff like that. Then, yeah, just disable it and it's fine. And it won't really cancel your game. Now, Microsoft is saying that this isn't going to remove the games you can play. So even in single-player games, even if they implement it, they can still access the game. So it's not like it's going to stop you from starting it up. But developers can still end up locking out any sort of content they want, and that's all going to hinge on how they use it. And it's just another tool that Microsoft is adding in, and I think it's pretty cool if they're adding in tools like this. It is mostly to compete with things like, let's say, Steam, because Steam has anti-cheat, VAC, that they can implement very, very easily. It's in a lot of single-player games that a lot of people don't really realize either, and it just kind of runs in the background and isn't heavy at all. It's not one of those things to where you're going to be like, oh my god, anti-cheat's here, it's ruining my gaming experience. Most of the time, it's just in there to make sure that they're not cheating in multiplayer and things like that, and it's very, very simple to implement. And it's obviously updated, and it's supported by a big company. Valve is a huge company, and so Microsoft also is a huge company that can implement something like this and keep it updated at a fairly frequent, database. And so when it comes into like new cheats and things like that, this isn't going to be something that ends up making it so it's like, oh my god, it's going to be one of those things to where it just evolutionizes anti-cheat. It's not one of those things, but it does have the benefit that it is an OS level anti-cheat, and so it can end up checking in on things like, oh, let's say if they're using any OS level hacks and things like that normal anti-cheats had a very hard time kind of detecting. There's a lot of tools that kind of go into the background of Windows, and they're like, all right, well, we're going to use this as a sneaky way, and then anti-cheat doesn't actually detect it until it goes into game and actually affects the game. Things like, aimbots for like headshot detection and things like that. So it'll be like, oh, well, we're going to use some OS detection for like, the screen display and things like that, or maybe they'll use color detection through the Windows actual drivers and things like that. And that's actually an interesting system because having an OS level makes it so they can detect these sort of things faster. Whether or not it's going to actually be faster, I don't know. We're going to have to see it once it actually gets implemented into all these sorts of types of games. We're going to have to see what people do with it, and we're going to have to see how easy it is to crack. But once again, any sort of anti-cheat is better than none when it comes down to single-player game or, multiplayer games and single-player games. When it comes down to single-player games, I'm not a big fan of having anti-cheat. But with the prevalence of things like loot boxes and microtransactions and more DLC and things like that, which DLC isn't necessarily new, but making it so that people can't crack into those is going to be common. But once again, it only works with Windows Universal Apps, which means its, usage cases are going to be pretty slim, and a lot of people are already not liking the Windows Store. And so when it comes down to, selling us on that, if they end up implementing this wrong, developers, not Microsoft, but I guess Microsoft too, if they make it so that it's like super heavy and isn't very, pleasant to play with, people are going to be like, oh, well, I'm just going to buy it on another platform. So Microsoft has to be really, really careful with this. And I don't know if you really necessarily have to do all that much. Nope, I want to skip that. I didn't want to talk to you. Go away. I just wanted to push a button because it was shiny. But once again, I don't know if Microsoft is really going to be pushing towards, people to use it. I think it's more of a feature that they wanted, and so they're just implementing it, and it's more and more gaming features to try and make Windows 10 the gaming platform and everything, which I'm perfectly fine with, and I think most people should be fine with it, even if they're not 100% successful. Wow, I cannot talk today. if they're not 100% successful, you know, it's still one of those things to where it's like, hey, more options is always a good thing, and having more competition inside of that game distribution space is interesting. And Windows Universal Apps, if you didn't know, is kind of like one of those things that's actually pretty cool. It's one of those things to where they're like, hey, we're going to make it so that this works on every single Windows platform. That includes mobile devices and things like that. And so it's not necessarily just, hey, we're going to make it so for Windows. It's also going to work on things like mobile and things like that, most likely in the future if it's working on Universal Apps, which again is kind of making it so it merges all of the platforms and makes it so like, hey, I developed this for one platform and it works on all platforms, which I am super, super okay with. Doesn't quite work yet, and obviously it goes down to developers to actually implement these sort of things, but again, it's actually pretty dang cool that we're heading towards that sort of direction. Anyways, what are your thoughts? Leave it in the comments. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this one. Make sure to, I don't know, I screwed up my outro. I was going to say thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. That's my normal outro. It's been a while since I've done one of these. And yeah, basically, I think it's pretty cool they're actually implementing this, but that's also from somebody that actually goes into the whole developer side of things. There are a lot of people that are very skeptical about this, and some people are like, oh man, I don't really want OS level detection and things like that, and they're all worried about privacy. The reality is, if it's in the OS, it's already detecting your stuff. It's really just doing what Microsoft already does with Windows 10. And so it's not going to be anything that's really necessarily outside of the ballpark that's normally going to be there. So if you're using Windows 10, it's not going to be like, oh, now you're all of a sudden giving out a bunch of information. The worrying part, though, is the fact that it might give out more information to, let's say, you know, the actual games and stuff like that. And so currently in the current implementation, from what I've seen, it doesn't give out any information to the actual, you know, game or developer or anything like that. It gives a very basic information of like what TruePlay is detecting. And so I'm not seeing necessarily any concerns with that, but at the same time, there could be some minor concerns to be had with that if you're worried about security and things like that. And so do watch out for that. Obviously, keep yourself up to date if you are really, really concerned with privacy and things like that. But obviously, you're probably going to be a person that's going to be already up to date about it if you're really that concerned about it. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's a cool feature. Obviously, leave your thoughts in the comments. Some people are skeptical. I really don't care. I think it's going to be a cool feature regardless. And I'm really excited to see Microsoft doing more and more of this, because in the Fall Creators Update, which I did update right away to kind of look at what everything was, they did kind of screw up some of the driver stuff. I've been having some stuttering in a lot of older games. It's not happening in newer games, especially the one in the background, which has been A Hat in Time. Fantastic freaking game, by the way. Way too short. I'm at the end of the game already, and I'm only like a few hours in. My sister played it for like 3 hours straight and got no progress done, so I guess it's going to depend on what you do. But it is just a fun, pleasant game if you want to look for it. And nice little platformer and stuff like that. It's a fun little game, and I'm enjoying it quite a lot. It's not, I wouldn't say it's better than Ukulele. A lot of people were like, oh my god, it's so much better than Ukulele. It's a completely different game than Ukulele. Although Ukulele died because basically it has quizzes. And I absolutely hate the quizzes. It is the most arrogant developer thing I've ever seen in my life. I thought they were 100% optional. I'm like, all right, that's fine. I don't care. And then I found out I needed to actually finish one to actually complete the game. And I'm like, oh, all right, that's kind of scummy. And so, yeah, that kind of sucks. But regardless, Hat in Time's pretty good. But yeah, Fall Creators Update for Windows and everything, if you're looking forward to it or looking to update, or you're questioning, you know, you have that little tab where it's like, you should update. It's going to force you to update eventually. And so go ahead and do it. I would say there's not really any concerns unless you're concerned about, you know, different sort of working sort of like software kind of crashing and stuff like that. So like, let's say you're using, I know the Adobe Creative Cloud is working perfectly fine, but let's say you're using some server software or something like that for your business. That's when you don't want to update. But aside from that, if you're just a user playing for video games and stuff like that, pretty good update. It's added in some new performance tweaks and stuff like that, and some more DirectX stuff, I believe, which I'm not sure if that was in this update or the last one, but I was reading on some developer blogs that that's what's going on and stuff like that. So yeah, great update, and I'm enjoying A Hat in Time, which, yeah, that's why I'm playing in the background, because it's a fantastic game. And right now I'm just running around grabbing collectibles and replaying levels because I'm at the end of the game and I'm running out of stuff to collect, and it's very, very sad. And so, yeah, anyways, thank you guys so much for watching, like I said, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Also, apologize for this video being a little bit rambly. I haven't recorded in a while, so apologies. I'm going to blow up a barrel.